On today's episode, Michelle's PHT success story. Welcome to the podcast helping you overcome your proximal hamstring tendinopathy. This podcast is designed to help you understand this condition, learn the most effective evidence-based treatments, and of course, bust the widespread misconceptions. My name is Brodie Sharpe. I'm an online physiotherapist, recreational athlete, creator of the Run Smarter series, and a chronic proximal hamstring tendinopathy battler. Whether you are an athlete or not, this podcast will educate and empower you in taking the right steps to overcome this horrible condition. So let's give you the right knowledge along with practical takeaways in today's lesson. For those of you who have listened to a lot of the episodes out there, I have had a Michelle success story in the past. This is a different Michelle. She was diagnosed with PHT in 2016 and talks about her journey. One of the most frustrating things about her story and what's different to some of the other success stories I've had in the past was her drawn out process of actually reaching a diagnosis, or an accurate diagnosis, I should say, because she saw 13 doctors before actually getting the PHT diagnosis, and we'll delve into that in a second. But this particular story shows a lot of resilience and a lot of lessons that we can learn around strength training, around sit standing, around just optimism and constantly striving for a management plan that's effective without giving up and just trying to reiterate and modify and just try new things. And like I say, a lot of lessons that PHT sufferers and any running related injury or overuse related injury can learn from. And so I was pumped to have Michelle on. This is actually take 2 of our recordings because last month we recorded and lost the recording audio. So a couple of weeks later, five weeks later or so, we came back on for round 2, and let's take it away. Michelle, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to being able to talk with you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well because success stories are high on everyone's priority list, and whenever I ask for feedback, people are just like, more success stories. And so I thought reaching out, that I think your story has a ton of lessons in there. And so would you mind maybe just starting off with how the PHT came about, how long ago it was, and what transpired to bring on those symptoms?
Sure. I remember it started in 2016 in November when I was at a football game, sitting on those nice metal stadium seats, and I just developed this pain in my butt, and thought, well, this is kind of weird. I don't know what this has anything to do with, and it wouldn't go away. So that was kind of disconcerting. Previous to that, I had been a special ed teacher or an inclusion specialist teacher, or they're referred to a lot of different ways, intervention specialist, in schools for about 20 years. And so I was constantly moving and not sitting a whole lot. But then previously in 2014, I had left that position and started a desk job. So this is about 2 years after that, but I continued to run and bike and do all of the things that I was normally doing with my teaching. But I wasn't doing a whole lot of strength training. But I was getting some strength training through my teaching career. But like I said, when I went to the desk job, that kind of went kaput. So sitting at this football game, I never would think that to connect anything to do with strength training or not strength training or running or cycling or anything like that. I would just think, well, this is weird that this happened. So I didn't really do a whole lot about it. Continued on my running, continued on my cycling. I think I did 3 half marathons that year. Wanted to train for a long bike ride. And then in 2017, I think I started picking up my cycling miles and was getting a lot more in the saddle time. And that's when I really started having a lot more pain on just one side, on just my left side. And that was when it really picked up. And so I thought, oh gosh, it has to be cycling now. Okay, it has to be. That's the evil thing. So I stopped doing that, and meanwhile, had visited a few doctors, and one was my, primary care doctor, and they didn't really know. Well, we thought maybe this could be ischial, or not ischial for my piriformis syndrome, which it seems to be a very common diagnosis that we all hear about. And went through some therapy for that. That didn't really do anything. Went back to another doctor and worked on that, and had many different doctors to work with throughout the process, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more.
Mm. And so you developed symptoms initially sitting on a hard surface or the hard chairs of the football game, and still continued to exercise, still continued to run, and symptoms were just, I guess, mild enough not to stop you. And while symptoms continued, you were going to a doctor to try and get answers, but were still exercising. Is that right?
Yeah, because it would hurt, a little when I would start running, but then it would go away after you run for a little bit, then it would go away. So that just reinforces you, of course, to run more.
Gives you the green light. Yep, I've seen that way too often. And then symptoms increased the following year once cycling picked up, and then that was more cause for concern.
Yeah, and it was one of those things of like we all seem to learn after the fact of that the pain comes around 24 to 48 hours after. So it's one of those that, again, it's hard to make the connections immediately to that, it's what you did a day or so ago. So that was always another thing too, that was like, oh, so along the way, I finally did start to keep a journal of what I was doing, and so I could kind of backtrack and be a detective and find out, what is it that's going on? What am I doing consistently here that's messing things up? But like you said, the pain was definitely increasing throughout this time, and I was having the sit job, and I got to where when I was at the job, I couldn't sit anymore, so I got a stand up desk, which was great. But then after a while, I got to where I was like, this is just uncomfortable just to stand. So I told my boss, I said, I'm like, if I could just walk forever. I said, it was just the standing or the sitting that's not good. He was like, well, let's just get you a desk treadmill. And I said,
Right.
I've never heard of this. What is this? So he showed one to me, and I was like, I'm good. Let's get that. So that helped a lot. But that was, of course, that was probably 2 or 3 years into it, before we got that.
One thing that fascinated me about your story was trying to seek a diagnosis, trying to seek medical professionals to help with this condition. And you said that you saw 13 doctors before you actually received the PHT diagnosis. And that was in, I think you said 2019. So 3 years later from symptoms initially starting. Do you mind talking through that experience and like what sort of diagnoses were arising and how treatment was suggested?
Sure. Like I said, right away, I thought, oh, this can't be anything big, so I won't really worry about it too much. So I mentioned something to my to my primary care doctor, and she was like, well, it sounds like piriformis syndrome. She's like, let's go with that. I said, okay. So started on that one. Went through some physical therapy for that, and some things worked, some things didn't, because they would have a mixture of strengthening and stretching exercises, and when I would do the strengthening, it'd be good, but when I would do the stretching ones, it would hurt again. So did that for a while, and then was like, okay, this isn't it, and went back to a doctor, and I'm trying to think which doctor that I went to. The second one, I think the second one was a referral from my primary to a bone, to the bone doctor, and that second diagnosis was ischial bursitis, and that one was the second one, yes, and so I went through and did some things that he thought, well, maybe we can do some steroid injections or, this kind of thing or whatever. And I'm like, I really like to try and keep out of injecting anything. Let's just try, the least it's restrictive, kind of thing first. So I did some oral steroids, and that seemed to take some of the tension and pain away, because at this point I was having issues with my nerves and having issues with the sciatic nerve. And I was really not being able to sit with that. So anyway, that was the second one. Then the third one, I don't know if I can remember what that one was. But then I know the fourth one was a Tarlov cyst diagnosis. And that one is kind of like a garbage disposal of symptoms. It kind of covers everything. And so I thought, okay, this has got to be it. This has got to be it. And then I start looking into stuff, and I'm like, I don't think I want this to be it, because there's really no recovery from it, besides having surgery on your spine, and didn't really want to do that. So I did go see a couple of the specialists in that area, and one of them actually said, well, I think some of the things that you're experiencing are from the Tarlov cyst, but I'm not sure what this pain in your butt is. He said that's not really a Tarlov cyst. So that was really what triggered me to continue on to another doctor. And he actually said, maybe you have some genetic issues. And so I came back and went genetic route and found that, no, that's okay. I'm fine with it. And then saw another, so after that one, I came back and nothing was wrong with genetically. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go back through all of the diagnoses that I've had and see if I've missed something. And so I went to YouTube, of all places, and ended up finding a video on, is it ischial bursitis or is it high hamstring tendinopathy? And from the Bob and
Brad.
I can't remember the other.
I'm familiar.
Bob and Brad, thank you. And watched that video, and I think it's about 6 minutes in or so that they were talking about, if you rub back and forth really hard on your area where you're having issues with your pain and sitting, and it doesn't increase your pain the next day, then they said you probably have high hamstring tendinopathy. And I thought, well, I've been in a lot of pain, let's try it. So I did, and I didn't have increased pain the next day, and I thought, ooh, let's check out this high hamstring tendinopathy. So I went on that route and started checking things. Well, so I gave it some time before I went to another doctor after that, just to kind of see, like, do you really think that this could be it? Because like I said, this has been, I think, almost 2 years probably that I've gone through these things. So I thought, no need to rush into another diagnosis. And so I gave it about, I think it was probably a few weeks before I ended up making an appointment with a doctor that was referred to me by one of our friends who is a doctor. He said, she's a cyclist as well. And, so she should probably know, about these things. I'm like, okay, well, let's try that. And I also got on Facebook, and there's a high hamstring tendinopathy, Facebook page that we all know about pretty much, that I just went and searched for Cincinnati and looked for doctors in the Cincinnati area, and ended up, the recommendation was for one of our local doctors, Dr. Kremchek, who is the Cincinnati Reds team doctor. And I thought, okay, let's make an appointment with him, and let's make an appointment with the other doctor that was recommended, because at this point I'm, pretty much making 2 appointments just to have backup and get a second opinion right away. So the first doctor that I saw that was recommended thought it was ischial femoral impingement syndrome, I think is what it was called. And I'm like, okay, well, that one sounds kind of interesting, but I don't know if that's it. And I happened to bring up the PHT, and she didn't think that that was it at all. I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm going to get a second opinion as well. Let's just go with it and see. So then I went to Dr. Krimchek, and he did the, exam, and he felt that it was PHT as well. And so I was kind of excited with the diagnosis because I thought, okay, I think we've finally gotten into something. And then I wasn't so excited when I started doing the therapy because, it takes so long to see any change. But so yeah, I ended up seeing 13 doctors and had 6 different diagnoses through the way. But I ended up not having any surgeries or anything like that done, which I'm very relieved.
I think there's a few lessons to unpack there. It sounds extremely frustrating just hearing your story and hearing like it's all in all, like if you know what PHT is and you know how to assess it, it's very easy to assess and diagnose if symptoms fit that of like a classic PHT. And so it could have just been so much easier for you if you just like went to the right health professional at the start. And so that's why like my blood boils. It's just so frustrating just to hear that. But there are a few takeaways in here. I think one, the story or like the lesson around like an incidental finding when scanning the body. Like I'm assuming with the Tarlov cyst, they would have scanned the back or scanned the hips and seen that there may have been some abnormalities there. But the thing around incidental findings is you can have a particular, you could show up something on a scan that doesn't have anything to do with your symptoms. And in fact, that finding may be totally asymptomatic and not be producing anything, especially when it comes to the back. We have disc degeneration, disc bulges, we have arthritic changes, and all of these are very, very common in a healthy population. And so if they then point to, oh, there's a Tarlov cyst here, that's the diagnosis, when in fact that's probably most likely going to be a total incidental finding. Did they do an MRI of the back or some sort of scans to diagnose that cyst?
That I did have some MRIs. I think I probably had 6 MRIs along the way. I had a couple of X-rays, and the X-ray actually was how they found the Tarlov cyst. So yeah, it's just, I agree completely with you because they've found so many things, within your body that, or within my body, I guess I should say, that are not correct and not good. But my body is still functioning
Yeah.
as good as it can. Even with those imperfections.
The other thing I wanted to delve into is the fact that treatment wasn't working, and you'd find a diagnosis like piriformis syndrome and you'd say, yeah, well, the strengthening might make things a little bit better, but the stretching doesn't make things feel better. I don't think this is it. Let me sort out a second opinion. And I think that's very wise to not only, you're not trying to like the diagnosis itself doesn't matter. What matters is if symptoms are improving or not. And then if they're not improving, that's when you need to start questioning either the diagnosis or the management of that diagnosis. And so you've done a very good job of paying attention, dissecting things and making sure that what you're currently doing, what is working, what isn't working, what are those individual factors to help you understand how your symptoms are behaving. I think that's a very important lesson to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. And the same thing too of, what works for me might not necessarily work for someone else, and what worked for someone else might not necessarily work for me. It's completely your body, and you have to do what works for you, for sure.
So once you had that diagnosis, once you said, oh, this PHT sounds like my symptoms, it sounds like what I'm describing or what I've been going through the past 2-3 years, how did you then approach it? What was the initial management like? And were you starting to see results after the correct diagnosis was made?
Yeah. So when I saw Dr. Krimchek, it happened to be on a Saturday, I remember, and in July of 2019. So it had been almost 3 years that I'd been dealing with it, which, listening to some other people, that's not very long at all, to have to deal with it. But he actually started me that same day with a PT, physical therapist, that was in his program there. And so, and he didn't, I mean, he knew about PHT, but he had not had a lot of experience with it. So I worked with him, and I had already met my deductible for my insurance at this point. So I was like, kind of thinking in my head, you're probably going to see me till the end of the year, whether you want to or not, because I've already met everything on this and I'm going to get as much out of this as I can. So he took me really as far as he could. But even after I had been doing PT for 6 months, I still had, some slight pain with sitting, and still, couldn't do everything that felt like I should have been able to do at the end of that time. And so I kind of was a little disgruntled, and I thought, and they just kind of were like, well, just keep doing what you're doing and keep in touch with us and let us know if things get worse. We can start things up again, or we can do some other things, injections or things like that. And then once again, I'm like, I just don't really want to inject anything if I don't need to. And so anyway, they had me go through and do some things and do some bridges and that kind of stuff. And I noticed improvement right away. But it did level off a few months after. And that was, kind of, like I said, disheartening. So I went ahead and continued on. And then to the end of the year, I was dismissed. And then in 2020, January of 2020, I started my own program. It's kind of like, get kicked off the school bus and, okay, here you go. You're on your own. Bye-bye. So I started doing some running, and just fast forward really quickly. And, I thought, well, maybe I'm doing too much physical therapy here after a while, and kind of started pulling back on it. And then ended up having a flare up about 6 months later, and then found a second physical therapist this was during COVID time, that I worked with, and had a lot more success with him. And now I'm able to run again. I just did a Thanksgiving Day race, here in the States, just a few days ago, and ended up winning my age group. And so it's one of those things, like, things are a lot better now, and I can sit and it's exciting. I can ride my bike. so things are much better now.
Can I maybe unpack that a little bit? So
Yes.
after the first PT, when you started doing some strengthening, it seemed like you noticed initial benefits, but then the benefits started to plateau out, and you did mention some bridges. And I query whether those strengthening exercises, just weren't progressive enough, or you weren't progressing frequently enough to continue with those gains. Looking back on it now, would you say that those strengthening exercises, while they initially had the benefit, it then plateaued out because you weren't progressing the weight, or progressing like how challenging the exercise was, or those sort of parameters?
No, I agree with what you're saying completely. I do feel like they weren't challenging enough, or they weren't situated exactly how they should be. Like the bridges that I'm doing, or that I had a lot more success with the second physical therapist. I do elevated bridges, and, do some things with that, and have a lot more success with the bridge than just doing bridges that are level on the floor. So it's a lot of little things that the second physical therapist, which him, Dwayne Scotty, he has a lot more knowledge about the physical therapy, or about the PHT, because he had it himself. He's also a runner, so he has a lot more knowledge about it, and was really good with guiding me through things. The first physical therapist that I had, he's not a runner. He didn't have it. His personal experience with PHT. So, like I said, he did as best as he could. But I just don't feel like it was completely guided towards exactly what somebody needs with that physical therapy with the PHT, because like you said, if you're not loading enough, then it's really, I guess, I'm speaking out of, I don't know, I'm not from physical therapy land, but I'm guessing if you aren't loading it enough, then it's really not like you're doing anything to it, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's a trap that some people might have, because initially when you notice that bridges or you can just name any type of exercise, if any strengthening exercise is showing a lot of benefit initially, you're like, yes, this is the answer, this is what I should be doing. And then you just become too strong for that exercise. It becomes a trap where people are like, I've been doing my bridges for 6 months straight, and while I saw initial benefits, it's just not doing it for me anymore, and strengthening isn't working. And a lot of people can interpret that as like, I've been trying all my strength rehab like you suggest, but it just hasn't done it for me. But then you go back and have a look at their history, and yes, it did work initially, but you just haven't followed it up with that progressive quality, because we all know that with strength and conditioning and with rehab, it needs to be progressive. Otherwise, you're just going to build yourself up. You're just capping your own ceiling and reaching a point where that exercise can no longer do anything for you. It's now redundant, and the next step is to make it harder or progress the weight, or like you say, you can make it more challenging by bridging with your feet up on a step. And that particular focus and that timeline is crucial when it comes to these sort of exercises, because like I said, you're just putting a cap on yourself and your ability to heal. It can be quite restrictive. I'm glad that you found Dwayne Scotty, and Dwayne Scotty is a friend of the podcast. I love the work that he does and the information that he provides. And I think it is another crucial step to have, like you say, try and find a PT that is a runner as well, or is experienced with seeing runners. You need to have someone who knows what it feels like to not be running or to start running, and the certain parameters around hills or speed work or warm-ups and all those individual components can be extremely helpful, because a PT that is also a runner knows the ins and outs of running and knows what it feels like and the demands on the body in so many different aspects. And I'm glad that you've found your current success, and like I say, you're back running. And do you mind just giving a bit more of an insight into your current capacity and your current like cycling capacity as well?
Yeah. Like I said, I stopped working with Dwayne. Let's see, this is the end of 2021. Stopped working with Dwayne at the beginning, about a year ago this time. And so, I was running just a little bit then. I can't remember how much, I think when we finished our sessions together, I think I was running maybe 3 miles, 2.5 or 3 miles. And I started out, he guided me through, and he wanted me running through the physical therapy process, which I was amazed with, because, with the previous physical therapist, they were like, nope, I'm going to tell you to stop running. That was, so two completely different approaches with the PT. But Dwayne, yes, definitely took me through the running, through the physical therapy process. And then, so about this time a year ago, I was doing about 2.5 or 3 miles at one running session. And now I'm up to, I think the longest run is 9 or 10 miles. I've just kind of been focusing on the shorter. The longest run I've done has been a 7K. So, 4.3 something miles. But I've been able to do well in these races, a lot better than I had before the physical therapy and before the PHT diagnosis. But throughout the process too of getting this PHT diagnosis, I also had some digestive issues and ended up finding out that I needed to eat more fiber, and ended up, because of eating more fiber, I ended up losing like 20 or 25 pounds. So that has helped increase the running ability as well. But
Of course.
so yeah, like I said, yeah, I mean, it's one of those that kind of just came along as well, which, so that's a good thing. But so yeah, like I said, the longest that I run for long miles is 9 or 10 miles. I do speed work once a week, speed work or a tempo run once a week, and then 2 other days of just easy running, and then a couple of days of cycling. And I'm on the trainer here because it's cold outside, first of all, and secondly, I'm not going super far, so it's easier just to climb on the bike in the basement rather than load it up and go somewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, so do those things, but I'm very thankful to be able to do all of those things and not be in pain afterwards.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations on your success. Congratulations on your rehab. It seems like you're really hitting your stride with your fitness routine. And as we wrap up, are there any final takeaways? Maybe if someone is struggling with PHT and they're listening to this, any other final tidbits or lessons for them? As we wrap up.
I think the biggest thing that was very helpful to me while I was going through the while I was going through PHT issues, and actually post PHT, has been to take a diary. It's not a lot of fun, but to do a diary or a journal of your activities that you do every day, even what you eat, and just to be able to see, do I have any triggers here? Do I have any commonalities that I have that are maybe setting off things, or doing something that way? That helped me, I think, probably the most. And then now looking back is when I was trying to figure out how to get through the PHT and how to get over it. You want to do it as quickly as possible, but also just to realize that, like I said earlier, what works for one person may not work for you, but to find yourself a good physical therapist who can identify with this and is willing to work with you and listen to you when you say this hurts, or this doesn't hurt, or this doesn't feel right, or whatever.
Yeah. I love what you're saying when you talk about what works for you might not work for someone else. And I think while most of it, the management principles are still the same, I think, the strength and conditioning portion, the, slow return to running portion, the paying attention to symptoms along the way, all of these are kind of universal managements. But if you try out something that's worked for someone else and doesn't work for you, it's all about being resourceful enough or creative enough to try something different, keep finding something that works. And I think those, that initial strengthening plan that you had is a prime example. Like the bridges were working and then sort of plateaued out, and it's up to the next step to be like, okay, this currently isn't working. What should we do? What should we try? And as long as you're paying attention to your individual symptoms, then that's the real goal for a tailored management plan. As soon as it's not working, change something up and trying to find something that does start working. And so plenty of lessons to unpack here, plenty of value throughout your whole lesson. I'm sorry the whole experience has happened, and especially around that misdiagnosed for so many years and getting second opinions, third opinions, more scans, more diagnoses so many times. I'm sorry that's happened to you, but I think it's an extremely valuable story that a lot of people can learn from. So thanks for coming on and sharing.
Thank you so much. I like to think of it as character building.
Fantastic. All right. You have a nice day, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks once again for listening and taking control of your rehab. If you are a runner and love learning through the podcast format, then go ahead and check out the Run Smarter podcast, hosted by me. I'll include the link along with all the other links mentioned today in the show notes. So open up your device, click on the show description, and all the links will be there waiting for you. Congratulations on paving your way forward towards an empowering, pain-free future. And remember, knowledge is power.